Hey there, night owls, welcome to the Voice of Darkness. I'm thrilled you've joined me on this journey into the unknown. Before we dive in, let me know, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments and let's see just how far our darkness reaches. Chapter 1, A Lonely Arrival. I stepped off the rattling shuttle into a cold drizzle that clung to my coat like unwelcome fingers. Before me lay Burj Hospital, a hulking silhouette against the smoky London skyline. Its windows were shuttered in darkness, and the tall, iron gates creaked as they swayed in the breeze. Even from here, a shiver ran down my spine. The hospital wore its desolation like a garment, every stone and corridor steeped in silence. The guard at the gate, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, barely acknowledged my presence. He checked my ID with a disinterested glance, then swung the gate back with a groan. As I walked up the cracked concrete path, each footstep echoed in the still air. Rows of dead lampposts lined the way, their bulbs shattered or long since burned out. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I was the first newcomer this night, the only living soul in this abandoned fortress. Inside the lobby, flickering fluorescent lights cast a jaundiced glow on peeling paint and scuffed linoleum. A lone reception desk stood guard beneath a cracked nameplate, Burj Hospital. I ran my fingers along its cold surface, expecting dust, but found only a faint, greasy smear. The silence pressed in on me, broken only by the distant hum of old machinery and the whisper of my own breathing. A nurse appeared at last, her posture rigid, her eyes empty. She motioned wordlessly toward a narrow corridor on my left. Without a smile or a greeting, she turned and padded away into the gloom. I swallowed hard and followed, each step sending a hollow thunk through the corridor's emptiness. My colleague, Brian, was waiting outside the storeroom that would double as my temporary office. He looked up from his clipboard, his expression unreadable. "Welcome to Burj," he said in a low voice. He gave me a brief orientation, where to find the break room, the guard station, and the morgue, but I could barely focus. His words felt distant, like echoes in an empty cavern. I paused at the juncture where the hallway forked. One path led toward the emergency ward, where the occasional flicker of overhead lights hinted at life. The other led deeper into the hospital's forgotten wings, radiology, storage, and beyond that, the ominous post-mortem room. Brian's gaze followed mine. "Stick close until you get your bearings," he advised, eyes flicking toward the darker corridor. "This place isn't exactly, well, welcoming." My heart pounded as I found the storeroom, just a small, sparsely furnished space with a metal table and a single chair. I set down my bag and unzipped it, pulling out a flashlight, a thermos of tea, and a small notebook. The flashlight's beam seemed almost intrusive in the heavy gloom, and I wondered if its weak circle of light would be enough to fend off the shadows. Outside, the wind rattled the corridor windows. I shivered and closed my eyes for a moment, recalling why I had taken this job, the promise of steady pay, the chance to gain experience in London, the thrill of facing something new. Yet standing here, I felt anything but prepared. The hospital's deserted halls felt like the throat of some great, silent beast, waiting, perhaps, for its next visitor. I turned the lock on the storeroom door and sat down, bracing myself for the long night ahead. As the clock on the hallway wall ticked toward midnight, I realized that nothing, not my training, not my determination, could have readied me for the hush of Burj Hospital's lonely arrival. Chapter 2, First Night Jitters. The changeover bell rang sharply at 8 o'clock, jolting me fully awake from the restless haze of travel. As Brian slipped away, I was left alone at the nurse's station in the emergency wing, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as if complaining about being forced to work past their prime. Outside the sliding doors, the deserted corridor stretched into darkness, the walls staining from years of neglect. I swallowed a gulp of lukewarm tea, bracing myself for what lay ahead. My pulse thrummed in my ears, each beat echoing off the sterile linoleum floor. Within the first hour, every minor disturbance became a looming threat. A distant drip of water from a cracked pipe sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps. The faint hum of the ventilation system took on a sinister edge, as though hidden voices whispered through the vents. My flashlight's beam skittered across empty gurneys and cluttered carts, illuminating acrid stains I didn't want to identify. The hospital's antiseptic smell was muddled by damp mildew and something else, like an old, unwashed blanket, that turned my stomach. I reached for the radio at my belt, but hesitated. I was alone, and the silence here felt more alive than any emergency call. At precisely 1:47 a.m., I froze. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, pattered down the hallway behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. Slowly, I swung my head, flashlight trembling in my hand. The corridor was empty, the white walls reflected nothing but my own wide-eyed reflection. I took a single step forward, and the footsteps stopped. Then, a low creak echoed from the nurse's station chair, as though someone had pulled it back. I spun around, but the station was deserted. Papers rustled on the desk, though no breeze stirred the stale air. I grabbed my radio and keyed the mic. "Brian? You there?" My voice sounded thin, brittle. There was no reply, only static. I tried again, louder. Silence. My own breathing sounded thunderous in my ears. Gathering my courage, I forced myself back into motion, determined to round the corner toward the guard room. But halfway there, a whisper drifted past my ear. "Leave." It was a hoarse breath, almost indecipherable. I bolted down the hall, adrenaline propelling me toward safety. Only when the guard room door slammed shut behind me did my legs give way, and I slid to the floor, chest heaving. Brian found me there 20 minutes later, flashlight in hand, expression unreadable. He knelt beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "First nights are the worst," he said quietly. His tone was sympathetic but firm. "Take deep breaths. Remember you're not alone." I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. He offered a small flask of coffee, and I accepted it gratefully, even though its bitter warmth did little to soothe the chill crawling up my spine. By the time dawn approached, the restless tension had only eased slightly. Each second held the promise of another phantom sound, another impossible shadow. I massaged my temples, forcing my racing thoughts to slow. Through the narrow window of the guard room, I caught the faintest glow on the horizon, my first glimpse of what daylight might bring. But as the pale light crept across the walls, I knew my fear wouldn't vanish with the sun. It would follow me, lurking in every echo and every corner, waiting for the next nightfall at Burj Hospital. Chapter 3, The Post-Mortem Warning. By the end of my second week, I had grown accustomed to the low hum of medical refrigerators and the distant clang of trays being wheeled through deserted corridors. Yet nothing prepared me for the gravity in Brian's voice when he found me outside the morgue one night, clipboard forgotten at his side. He cleared his throat, eyes darting down the hallway as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. "Listen," he said, his tone uncharacteristically grave. "There's one place you must never, ever enter after dark." He nodded toward the heavy steel door ahead, its small window shuttered with frosted glass. "That," he said, "is the post-mortem room." I nodded, but the words hung in the stale air like a dare. "Why?" I managed, forcing curiosity over fear. Brian's face tightened. "Because whatever's in there at night isn't human. And if it calls your name, don't answer. Even if it speaks with your own voice." His words snapped me fully awake. I peered through the slit of light under the door and saw nothing but a faint smear of grey paint on concrete. Yet as Brian spoke, I felt a cold draft, as if breath etched with ice were streaming out to meet me. "It's not just superstition," he insisted, lowering his voice further. "We've lost people here, staff who walked in for a quick check and never came out. We find their coats, their radios, but no bodies. Those calls you hear, John. Sarah, come here, they use your name to lure you inside." I swallowed, picturing the empty coats. "But the door is locked," I said. "I'd need the key." Brian's hand dropped to an invisible belt at his side. "There are keys," he admitted, "but you must never ask for them. If someone inside beckons, they already have your key. It's best just to keep your distance." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant drip of a sink. I thought of the soft, eerie voice that had whispered through my radio on my first night. Could that have been from here? My pulse quickened as dread pooled in my stomach. Brian glanced over his shoulder. "If you ever hear your name coming from behind that door, go straight to the guard room. Lock yourself in, don't look back, and wait until morning. If you dodge whatever is inside long enough, it might lose interest. But once it gets you, it doesn't let go." He stepped back into the gloom, leaving me alone with his warning. My flashlight seemed suddenly inadequate, its beam too narrow to ward off the encroaching dark. I found myself rehearsing my escape route, nurses station to guard room to safety, all in less than 30 seconds. That night, as I made my rounds, every echo felt like a summons from beyond that sealed door. I caught myself hesitating at every turn, imagining a figure beckoning from inside the post-mortem room, whispering my name in a voice both familiar and wrong. When I reached the morgue at dawn to collect paperwork, the door stood silent and inert. The lock held firm. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of Brian's warning, nor the cold draft that seemed to seep from the seams. From then on, I vowed I would never test the truth of his words. Some doors, I realized, are better left unopened. Chapter 4, The Vanishing Nurse. That night, the hospital felt more deserted than ever. I'd just finished restocking medical supplies in the ward when I heard a soft tap, tap, tap echoing down the main corridor. Pausing, I trained my flashlight toward the sound and, to my surprise, saw a lone nurse standing at the reception desk. Her uniform was immaculately pressed, her posture unnaturally still. The overhead lights flickered, making her shadow dance against the walls. "Excuse me," she called, voice low and melodic. My relief at finding another person was fleeting. Why was she here alone after midnight? Something about her tone unsettled me. I swallowed hard and stepped forward. "I'm just checking in," I stammered. "Is everything all right?" She offered a gentle smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, of course," she said, raising a delicate hand. "Could you bring the new patient forms to me?" I nodded, suppressed a wince at the absurdity of patient forms in an empty building, and bent to retrieve the documents from my bag. When I looked up again, she was gone. Not a step away, gone. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the empty space around the desk. The only sound was the distant hum of the emergency lights. "Hello?" I called, voice cracking. My footsteps faltered as I approached the desk, each tile clicking under my weight. Papers lay scattered, but no sign of the nurse. My flashlight beam settled on the reception chair, tilted, as if someone had just stood up. I reached out to steady it, half expecting her to appear behind me. When she didn't, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. The corridor ahead seemed to stretch farther into darkness than before. A faint rustle behind me made me whirl around, nothing. My flashlight revealed only peeling paint and an overturned waste bin. I forced myself to exhale, convinced exhaustion had conjured a phantom. Then a breathy whisper floated through the air, "Thank you." It was delicate, almost grateful, but so close to my ear that I instinctively whirled, shining my light. Still, no one stood there. I raced to the guard room, slamming the door shut and dropping to the floor, pressing my back against the cold metal. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Moments later, Brian found me huddled and pale, radio clutched to my chest. "What happened?" he asked, eyes wide. I saw her, I gasped. "At reception." She asked for forms. When I turned, she vanished. Brian's face went ashen. He knelt before me. "You did exactly the right thing." Never approach her. She only appears to lure you out. His voice was firm but kind. If you see her again, run. I nodded numbly, heart still racing. Even now, I can recall her uniform's crisp white and the uncanny stillness of her smile, proof that at Burj Hospital, the living and the vanished walk its halls in equal measure. Chapter 5, Stranger with a Tool. The hallway was cloaked in dim light, broken only by the sporadic glow of emergency fixtures overhead. I had just completed my routine check of the patient rooms and was making my way toward the guard room when I noticed movement at the end of the corridor. A figure stood silhouetted against the frosted glass of the main entrance. My pulse quickened as I squinted to make out details. The person held something long and thin in one hand, an instrument that gleamed ominously under the flickering lights. My breath caught. The shape resembled a surgical saw, its jagged edge stark and foreboding. I remembered Brian's warning, if anyone approaches with a tool after dark, do not confront them, hide immediately. I froze, listening. My footsteps fell silent on the cracked linoleum. The stranger took a slow step forward, the blade catching another flash of light. With it came a soft metallic ring, like the clear toll of a distant bell. My throat constricted. Every instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself to move carefully, inching toward the guard room door. The corridor seemed to stretch unnaturally long, as if the walls themselves were pushing me away. Behind me, I heard the faint scrape of boots. My heart thundered, each beat hammering in my ears. I dared not turn. I reached the guard room door and yanked it open, slipping inside. Kneeling, I slammed it shut and threw the old bolt into place. The confined space felt suffocating, but safety lay just beyond the reinforced plank of wood. Outside, the lone corridor light buzzed and sputtered. Through the small window, I watched the stranger step into the frame. The blade glinted, and the silhouette's shoulders rose in a slow, measured breath. They raised the tool in a mock salute, then lowered it. The figure seemed to study the door, as if weighing its strength. My palms pressed flat against the cool window pane. A soft knock sounded on the door. 3 gentle taps, tap, 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 each heavier than the last. My blood ran cold. I dared not breathe. The knocking paused, and a low voice drifted in, hollow and accented. "Open up," it rasped. I pressed my ear to the door, but the words made no sense in the stale air. It might have been a name, or an invitation. I backed away, sliding down to the floor. My legs trembled uncontrollably. The knocking resumed, slower this time, deliberate. My radio lay abandoned on the narrow shelf. I reached for it, my fingers shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "Brian," I stammered into the mic, "there's someone here." Static hissed in reply, but no voice came through. The corridor light blinked out, plunging the window into darkness. The knocking stopped. Silence reigned, broken only by the hum of the guard room's single desk lamp. I sat in the gloom, heartbeat echoing like distant drums, until the faint glow of dawn seeped through the edges of the door. When Brian finally arrived, flashlight in hand, he found me huddled in the corner, rocking slightly. He crouched beside me, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You did right," he said quietly, voice firm. "No sense risking it." He glanced at the window. Few have seen him up close and lived to talk about it. Best to leave that corridor empty at night. I nodded, relief and terror warring inside me. As Brian guided me back into the corridor, I realized how fragile safety felt at Burj Hospital. Even a simple instrument could become an instrument of dread under its oppressive shadows. From the corner of my eye, I half expected to see that silhouette reappear, but the corridor remained empty, save for our hurried footsteps and the lingering echo of a hidden menace. Chapter 6, Sanctuary in the Guard Room. The guard room was a modest space, far too small for comfort, but infinitely more secure than the endless corridors of Burj Hospital. Its metal door, reinforced by a heavy bolt, was my lifeline through those long nights. Inside, the single fluorescent lamp hummed with a persistent gloom, casting more shadows than light. A narrow window, barred and scratched, offered a view of the deserted hallway, though dawn often arrived before I dared to look out. That evening began like any other, my rounds completed, the corridors swept clean of debris, my flashlight's beam sharp against dark walls. But unease clung to me as I approached the guard room. I felt, rather than saw, the presence of something watching. When I reached the door, I found it ajar, as though inviting me in. Hard hammering, I slipped inside and sealed the bolt behind me. The click echoed like proof that I was still alive. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee and antiseptic. A metal desk bore the dents and scratches of decades. On it lay a half-burned candle, remnants of a guard's late-night vigil. I set my gear down and sank into the stiff chair. My legs, still trembling, thanked me for the respite. Through the tiny window, I watched the corridor's emptiness, each tile pristine but for the dark stains no one would explain. Yet even here, relief was fleeting. Every few minutes, I'd hear a soft knock at the door, tap, pause, tap, a rhythm too deliberate to be random. I'd press my back against the cold metal and hold my breath until the sound died away. Sometimes, I thought I caught a glimpse of a pale hand at the edge of the window, or felt a brush of air as if someone had passed inches from my ear. When that happened, I'd press my hands over my eyes and recite a silent prayer until I dared move again. To pass the hours, I kept a small radio on the desk. Its static was a lifeline to the outside world. I'd scroll through channels, listening for any human voice beyond these walls, even if it was just a late-night traffic report. Once, I thought I heard my own name crackle through the speakers. I slammed the radio off, heart racing, unwilling to risk another illusion. Midnight tea grew cold in a chipped mug. I traced the hospital's layout on the back of a memo pad, corridors, wards, exits I had never seen. Each time my pencil hovered over the morgue or the post-mortem wing, I hesitated, unwilling to map the places that harbored whispers and vanishings. Instead, I outlined the guard room over and over, as if engraving my sanctuary onto paper. Hours passed in a blur until a pale glow seeped under the door. Dawn was breaking. I hesitated before unlatching the bolt, half afraid the morning light would undo itself like a cruel joke. Finally, I opened the door and stepped into the corridor, blinking against the sudden brightness. The hospital's hush seemed less menacing in daylight, yet I knew it hid its true nature behind a mask of neutrality. As I left the guard room behind, I touched the cold metal handle and left a silent vow, no matter how desperate the darkness became, I would always find my way back to this small refuge. For in those cramped confines, with its stubborn light and rickety defenses, I had discovered something vital, hope against the hospital's lingering dread. Chapter 7, Dawn Inspection of the Morgue. The first pale streaks of dawn slipped through the narrow windows of Burj Hospital, casting long, trembling shadows along the corridor walls. My night shift was officially over, but one final duty loomed, inspecting the morgue. With each passing hour of darkness, I'd felt its silent pull, an unnameable dread that seemed to seep through the heavy steel door. Now, burdened with exhaustion and apprehension, I approached the entrance with careful steps. The morgue door stood shut, its surface chilled to the touch. I placed my palm flat against the cold metal, steadying myself, and slid the latch open. A low hiss greeted me as the temperature dropped sharply, like a breath from an icy cavern. I flicked on the overhead light. It sputtered for a moment before settling into a steady glow that revealed the room's stark interior. Pale bodies lay on stainless steel tables, their forms obscured by waxen sheets. Each table stood motionless, as if asleep, but the air carried a faint tremor, a hum of residual energy that prickled my skin. My flashlight beam danced over tags clipped to wrists, listing names I would never know and ages that no longer mattered. The stillness was absolute, even the hum of the refrigeration unit felt muffled. I drew a deep breath and checked my watch. 6 minutes past sunrise. I had precisely 45 minutes before the day shift crew arrived. I moved from table to table, carefully inspecting each body bag for leaks or tears. My gloved fingers brushed cool plastic, and at times I thought I saw a slight bulge, as though someone underneath had shifted position. My heart thumped. I shone my flashlight at the edges of each sheet. Everything remained unnervingly still. Halfway through, a distant groan echoed from the ventilation grate. My flashlight swung toward the sound, but the grate's metal slats were undisturbed. The groan came again, low, resonant, and almost human. I froze, remembering Brian's warnings about things that moved when they shouldn't. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the tables. Nothing stirred. Summoning resolve, I pressed on. One table near the back corner bore a fresh tag. I knelt and inspected the body bag's zipper, ensuring it was fully closed. As my glove grazed the zipper pull, a sudden gust of frigid air washed over me. The overhead light flickered violently, and for a fleeting moment, I was certain I saw a pale hand emerge from the bag's unzipped seam. I yanked my hand back, heart racing, but the bag lay undisturbed when the light steadied. I clenched my teeth and stood upright, swallowing the lump in my throat. 10 minutes remained. I moved quickly now, rifling through paperwork on a nearby cart, reports on temperatures, contents, storage times. My flashlight's been swept across the floor, illuminating a dark stain that hadn't been there earlier. My stomach lurched. It formed a rough shape, like a footprint, though the floor showed no raised edges. I scuffed at it with my boot. Nothing. The stain remained stubbornly etched into the concrete. Alarmed, I took a step back. The hum of the refrigeration unit grew louder, its pitch shifting as if reacting to my presence. I spun, flashlight raised, seeking an escape route. The door stood just yards away, but the corridor beyond seemed shrouded in mist, even in daylight. I realized that for all its brightness, the morgue had swallowed the sun's warmth. With a final, forceful breath, I sliced the lock open and burst through the door. The hospital's corridors greeted me with soft morning chatter, voices and footsteps that felt impossibly normal. My pulse pounded as I leaned against the wall, willing the tremors in my limbs to subside. The morgue had revealed nothing tangible, yet left an indelible mark on my mind. As I watched the sunrise pour into the ward, I knew that the cold hush of that room would follow me long after I finished my shift. Chapter 8, Breaking Point and Departure. The night I decided to leave arrived like any other, yet felt impossibly heavier. I'd spent 4 weeks skirting shadows, hard hammering in every silent corridor, and this time exhaustion and dread had fused into a single, searing ache. By 3:13 a.m., my flashlight's batteries were nearly drained, its weak beam struggling to cut through the gloom. I was supposed to do one more patrol, check the storage rooms, confirm the emergency exits, but my limbs felt leaden and my mind hazy. I paused outside the supply closet, where every steel shelf and locked cabinet had once promised order. Now they seemed complicit in the hospital's oppressive hush. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. The thought of stepping inside, only to emerge into another stretch of empty hallways, broke something inside me. I realized I could not endure one more hour of this place. I retreated to the guard room, my sanctuary and prison, and closed the reinforced door behind me. The single lamp overhead cast a pallid circle of light on the desk, illuminating Brian's flask and his haphazard notes. I sank into the chair, fingers curled around the edge. Memories flooded back, the nurse who vanished, the whisper behind my ear, the distant clank of an unseen presence. Each recollection tightened the knot in my chest. I dug into my jacket pocket and pulled out my ID badge, the only proof of my connection to Burj Hospital. My eyes stung as I traced the engraved letters. This badge had opened every door, yet it felt meaningless now. With trembling fingers, I unclipped it and placed it on the desk, an offering, a farewell. My radio crackled to life with a distant voice checking in on morning routines. I reached for it, voice trembling. "Brian." "I'm done," I whispered. My words felt alien, as though spoken by someone else. I heard his heartbeat in the static, a brief hesitation before he replied, "Understood. Get out of there." I rose and unlocked the door. As I stepped into the corridor, the hospital seemed to hold its breath. The emergency lights flickered once, as if bidding me one last warning. But I pressed forward, following the path that would lead me to the main entrance, the same route that had welcomed me weeks ago with cold indifference. At the foot of the stairwell, I paused. The walls were streaked with old watermarks and scrawled maintenance codes. I'd memorized every turn, every junction, but tonight they felt alien, an unending maze. I closed my eyes and exhaled, then strode upward, each step a quiet act of defiance. The front doors lay ahead, their glass panes smeared with rain from earlier in the evening. I grasped the handle and turned it, expecting resistance. Instead, the door opened with a soft sigh, as if the hospital itself was letting me go. Outside, the London sky was beginning to brighten, the first hint of dawn painting the horizon in pale rose and gold. I stepped onto the wet pavement, breathing in the crisp morning air. The hospital's outline receded behind me, its dark windows now lifeless from this distance. My shoulders, once hunched in perpetual tension, eased for the first time in weeks. With each stride toward the bus stop, the weight in my chest lightened. As the city stirred to life, I realized fear had marked my time at Burj Hospital, but it would not define me forever. I folded the night's terror into a silent resolve, to cherish sunlight, to embrace certainty over shadows. 1 month had taught me my limits, and that some doors, once closed behind you, lead to your own liberation.